Good morning. Welcome to Bob's Coffee Chat. I am excited to have my friend Scott Bowman presenting us for us today. Scott is a business coach with 10 years experience coaching entrepreneurs in leadership, sales, and marketing. He brings a holistic human approach that joins business success with life success. And he sees the opportunities that our businesses provide as the chance to become our better selves. So Scott, how can we like selling if we hate sales?
Yeah, it's something of a conundrum. Before we start, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Angela and Sheila. It's good to see you both. I've hired both of them. They're amazing. Don't feel any hesitation about contacting those two. Welcome, everybody. My name is Scott Bowman. As Bob said, I've been a business coach for the last 10 years. I've been in sales and marketing for about 25 years, which is getting embarrassing to say. I've been good at sales for a long, long time. I never wanted to be. It was never an aspiration of mine. And there were a lot of times when I really didn't like it. And I didn't like the fact that I was the one who was good at it. So I was the one who had to do it. But about 20 years ago, I really started to like it. But it's only been in the last few years, the last 5 or so, that I've really gotten good at helping other people get good at it and understand how to do it well. And the most important kind of central element to my approach to this and to what I've discovered is you sell better when you are exactly who you are. But you don't have to become somebody else. The big myth is that you need to be someone else. Now, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to look at 3 myths today. 3 kind of core myths about sales. And in looking at them, what we're going to discover, I hope, is that sales is something that you can get good at and that you actually do, that you will like it. So those myths real quick. Myth 1, the sale is the most important thing. The second myth, you sell by talking. And the third, you need the eye of the tiger to succeed. So this is what we're going to get into. So first, I'm curious, and I might want some folks to pop in here. When I say the word salesman, and I'm using the old-fashioned gendered version of that for a reason. When I say the word salesman, what do you think of? Anybody?
Kirby vacuum or a car salesman.
Yep, got it. Thank you. Anybody else?
Telling you what you may not need or want, but just the item or the sale is what's most important, not really you.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila. One more.
Willie Loman, Death of a Salesman.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, Death of a Salesman. For me, I think of a car salesman. Does anybody remember Cal Worthington and his dog Spot? Anybody? Right, that's the perfect thing for me. When we think of sales, when we think of salesmen, we tend to gravitate towards a pretty despicable image. And our culture has actually, the American culture has a long history of despicable associations with sales. You think back to the snake oil salesman, the carpetbaggers, the traveling salesman, the door-to-door salesman. We think of politicians as salesmen. And do you really need a worse association with sales than politics? I mean, so the narrative that we're in when we are moving towards sales is a really disempowering, crappy narrative. And we just don't want to be that guy, right? And it's always a guy. You know, it's in our preconceptions around who, you know, what sales is, we're always thinking about men and crappy men. There isn't any room, even in the bad story about what sales is, for women to actually participate as equals. So the narrative is a really disempowering, terrible narrative. And before we can actually get good at sales, we have to find our way into a different narrative. And one of the qualities of, or rather, if we look at the qualities of what the narrative is, you know, what our story of sales is. Some of you have mentioned, like, and we're all going to be real familiar with this. It's convincing, it's dominating, it's taking, it's being deceptive, it's a win-lose, it's an it's an advantage-disadvantage thing. It's making someone do something they don't want to do, right? Basically, this is the kind of background story that we're in when we're engaged in the process of sales or when we're thinking about sales. And the kind of dirty underbelly of this is that we think of sales as low class, right? That we think that we're somehow above people who have to sell for a living, that it's a dishonorable thing to do, right? There's nothing dishonorable about sales. It's not tacky. There are a lot of tacky people who do it. But as Rob pointed out, all of us are in sales in one way or another. If you are trying to convince your teenager to do their homework before they hit the sheets, you're in sales. If you're trying to convince your 4-year-old to eat peas, you're in sales, right? Anytime you are trying to influence someone to make a decision, you're in sales. So this idea that somehow we are above that is really ludicrous, but it's more about not wanting to be that guy. So we need a better narrative, right? How do we do that? Well, that brings us to the first myth, that the sale is the most important thing. And that's simply not true. The process is the most important thing. I know that sounds strange, but think about it this way. What happens when the process is bad? When the sales process is bad? Can you kind of think back into your mind to a time when you've been in a sales situation and the process was bad? Everybody kind of got one of those in their head. Probably you felt something like badgered, coerced, fearful, resentful, dependent, diminished, confused, right? You come out of there feeling less powerful. So even if this person, if you have a bad process, this is what's happening for the person you're talking to. So even if they buy from you, now you've got a relationship that's starting from that place. And the very worst thing, and this is certainly the case for those of us in the service trades, very worst thing would be that someone buys your service when they shouldn't. Like the last thing that you want is a customer who isn't actually an appropriate customer for you. There's nothing more expensive than a bad client. Right? Bad clients sap our own confidence, they sap our reputation, they erode our value. And all of this, when the process is bad, and particularly now when each one of us has access to international media and our reputations soar or crash based on what happens on social media, these qualities, these experiences become enormously powerful in the public eye. So if people are reporting that they're having a crappy experience with you, it doesn't matter if they're buying, your business is going to go down. So now let's look at what happens when the process is good. And for all our stories about sales, we all probably have had one or two really good experiences with sales. And I'm curious, just kind of spend a minute thinking about it. And then just raise your hand if you can remember having a really good experience being sold to. One? Just one? My God. My ex-wife and I bought a Volvo once, and we were going onto car lots, and we did this thing where we'd tell them, they would ask how much we want to spend, and we'd tell them the number, and then they would show us a car $2,000 more than that. And this happened with boring repetition. And so we made the decision that that was going to be our filter, that we're going to ask that question. And if they didn't show us a car that was that price or less, we were going to just turn on our heels and walk out without a word, which we ended up doing. And the next one we went, and there was this big, gruff guy. He looked like a used car salesman. He had a cigar. He had this big belly. The tacky suit, the whole thing. It wasn't too tacky. But we told him the number, and he said, okay. And he walked us over and he showed us this car, this one. And he was really grumpy with us. It's like, don't touch that. And but it was kind of a shtick, a little bit of a shtick, but it was not really. It's like he was a grumpy old guy. But he told us all about the car. He knew his stuff. And then he said, okay, so we've seen this one. Now, can I show you one that's $2,000 more? It's like, yes. So we saw the car. We didn't want that one. We bought a car from him that day. He was hysterical. We had such a good time with him. He was straight. He was honest. He listened, right? So we have good experiences with sales. It's just that they're kind of tough to remember. But when the process is good, what you end up with is someone who's feeling empowered, someone who's feeling clear, someone who's feeling confident, someone who's closer to what they want, right? Then you've got a relationship that's starting on trust, mutual regard, and respect. Now, even if that person doesn't buy from you, they're somebody who's going to recommend you to others. And they are going to, again, this is going to build trust, build brand value, build credibility over time. So the way out of this narrative, this crappy narrative about what sales is to commit to the process being great, right? Don't worry about whether they're going to buy from you or not. Make sure that they have an excellent experience with you. So that brings us to the second myth, which is you sell by talking, right? And this kind of comes to the introvert extrovert question, right? You have to be extroverted to be good at sales. You got to have the gift of gab. It doesn't help you at all. Actually, you sell by listening. Like we talked about having a good process. What does that mean? So a sales process is actually really, really simple. The first thing is you understand what their problem is. And as part of that, you make sure they know that you understand what their problem is. Right? You create understanding. And then you tell them what you think they should do. You give them your honest opinion on the matter of expertise that they're asking you about, and you tell them what they should do. You create understanding, and then you are honest with them and you build trust. That's it. It's dead simple. So, Rick, I think when you're talking about, all of these tips and all these tricks, it all gets so confusing, and it's all so much to think about. All of that takes you out of rapport and out of connection with the person you're talking to, right? So for everything that you have to remember, you're not being present with the person that you're with. So one mentor of mine used to kind of, as his constant refrain, never sacrifice rapport. Like no matter what is going on, if you lose rapport, you've lost that person. You have to back up and get that back. So a good process is understanding and then trust. So how do you create understanding? So this is the way I like to think about this is we all have a cloud of concerns in our head about what we're worried about, what we're caring about. And it's kind of like if you remember Pigpen from Charlie Brown, it's this cloud, and nothing can get through. Like we're barraged by about 10,000 marketing messages a day, brand images and marketing messages. And none of those get through unless they match what is in our cloud. Like the stuff that we're concerned about, those messages will hear. That stuff gets through. And my experience of this once was about 5 years ago, I guess. I was coaching in a program where we were helping entrepreneurs develop their premium program. It's going to be their big year-long coaching program. And one of the guys stood up and he said, "I've got the name of my program." And then he said it, and I've got to apologize ahead of time. You'll understand why. He said it, and I thought two things at the same time. I thought, you can't sell a program like that. How can you market something like that? And then I also thought, I could hire that guy. And I did. And it was because his program is called Get Your Money Handled, with a word I can't have on YouTube in there. And what was occurring to me at the time was that was the mantra of concern that was going through my head. It's like, I've got to get my money handled. And so a guy stands up and offers a program called that. I'm like, sign me up. You just show me you've got a pulse, and I'm there. This is because there's a basic principle in marketing, which is if you can articulate someone's problem as well or better than they can, they'll attribute to you the ability to fix it. And I got that full force with this guy in that program. So the mechanics of this are that if you're talking to somebody, you don't understand what their cloud of concerns is, everything you're saying is bouncing off, right? You have to get what their concerns are in the language that they understand them. And until you do, you can't actually have a conversation for sales. So the first thing is you have to understand what their concern is, or what they're concerned about, what they care about, how it occurs to them. And all of that is through listening. And what you want to create is the experience of being heard. So there are a bunch of communication skills that you can apply to this. There's active listening, there's reflections and mirroring, there's a concern inventory. There are other kinds of things. I'm going to tell you about one from a guy named Chris Voss that I really like. But the first and the most important thing is that your intent is that person experience being heard and gotten. And I want to ask you all, have you ever had the experience of you were speaking to somebody and they just totally got you? They deeply registered what was going on for you. Have you had that experience? Just show me a hand if you have. Right. Now, was it meaningful for you? Right? Like that mattered, right? It mattered so much that you can actually remember it now. There's a quote that I really love. It's by a guy named David Augsburger. He said, the difference But for most people, the difference between being heard and being loved is so slight that they can't tell the difference. For the average person, being heard is experienced as being loved. Being heard is itself a transformational experience. I'm a coach. Like, most of what I do is trying to propel people into a different level of performance, and most of that action is hearing them and getting where they're at. Like, just the experience of being heard can deeply shift someone's day to the point where they would raise their hand years later to say, yes, they remembered that. That's the opportunity that you have in a sales conversation. You have the opportunity to give someone that, right? To feel deeply heard and seen. In fact, not only do you have that opportunity, it's the first thing you have to do. Once someone feels deeply seen and gotten, you can have a conversation about solutions. But until they know that you know what they're worried about, they're really not going to listen very carefully. So how do you do that? As I said, there are a bunch of communication tricks for doing this. They're not tricks, but methods. I want to tell you about one. This is from a guy named Chris Voss. He wrote a book called Never Split the Difference, which I highly recommend. And it's called The 3 Yeses. He says there are 5 no's and 3 yeses. We're not going to talk about the no's, though he does talk about sometimes it's important to go for a no, which we don't often do. But the 3 yeses, there are 3 kinds of yes. The first is what he calls a confirmation yes. And that's just, is your name Scott? Yes, my name is Scott. Just confirming that something is true. The second is a counterfeit yes. And a counterfeit yes sounds like this. Yep, you're right. Yeah, I should do that. No, I get it. You're completely right. Yep, no, Right. That's a counterfeit yes. And the purpose of a counterfeit yes is to make you go away. It's to stop the conversation and get on to the next thing. There's no desire for action in that. And the last yes is called a commitment yes. And that sounds like this. That's it. That's right. That's when you know that someone has gotten you. When you hear, that's right. At that point, you can transition to a conversation about solutions. But if you hear a counterfeit yes, if you hear someone say, yeah, you're right, you're totally right, just know that you've lost them. And the best thing to do is to name it right away and back up. Say, yeah, okay, you're saying yes, but you don't mean that, do you? Like, no, okay, I lost you. Where did I lose you? Let's back up. And you go back and you find out, where did they fade off? And they'll tell you, and that will be the concern that you missed, right? So the first thing is to create the experience of being deeply seen and heard. That is a beautiful thing to do, human to human. And it's also the most important and functional thing that you have to do to have an effective sales conversation, to have an effective process. Let's put it that way. Okay, so I'm gonna move on here. Oh, excuse me, that's annoying. So I want to tell you one other communication trick, which is the inventory of concerns. So this is when you have somebody who's really hesitant and nervous about what's going on. To create the feeling of being heard and seen in this, you want to just repeat back to them. You create an inventory, a tally of all the concerns they might have. So it might be something like, okay, so if I'm understanding you right, this seems like an awful lot of money for you. You're not sure if you have the time. You don't trust yourself to actually follow through in this way or to learn this particular skill. And you think I might be a con man. Is that what we've got going on here? And when you do that, you can again create that feeling of being heard and registered and seen. Like, from there, you can start to address individual concerns. Okay, so that's the which myth are we on? I'm losing my myths. Oh, you sell by talking. You sell by listening. Talking has so little to do with it, right? It's all about listening. It's about making sure that that person feels completely understood. And that brings us to the last myth. You have to have the eye of the tiger, right? That sales is a battlefield, and there is so much in the literature about this, about about winning the sale, about driving the close. There's all this militant language, right? This kind of nastiness, this oppositional quality that sales is this fierce, ferocious thing that you have to get tough to succeed. Actually, if it's not the case that you win, that you sell by talking, it's not the case that that sales is a battlefield, then what is it? Well, you're actually trying to solve the same problem. You're both trying to solve your potential client's problem. And we talked about sales as first kind of establishing understanding and then trust. So we talked about the understanding. Here's where the trust comes in. Once the person feels seen and heard and understood, what there is to do is to simply tell them your honest thoughts and opinions as an expert in this area as to what they should do or what their options are. Like, this is what I've got for you. Like, I understand your situation is this. This is what I have for you. If you think that what you have is the wrong thing for them, tell them so. If you think it's the right thing for them, tell them so. And if you're not sure, tell them that. I have sold things to people by telling them not to buy them. And this is going to date me, but decades ago, I was leading a sales floor for a company that sold headset telephones. And I was talking to a guy who had he was going to place a fairly large order, and he was saying, "Look, let me understand what your situation is." And he told me. He said, "Okay, so given that, what we have is this, but for what you need, I think you need this model here, and we don't carry that. I think you can get it here or here. I can give you a couple of places to go." And he paused for a second. He said, "Okay, I'll take 5 of yours." Okay. So I started filling out the order, and I asked him while I was doing that, "Why are you buying this from me when I told you not to?" And he said, "I'd much rather get this from someone I trust." Like, he would rather have something that was clearly evaluated by somebody he trusted than have to buy something that someone says is really great and right for him when he doesn't trust them. So trust is everything. And trust is about the two of you solving the same problem together, right? We approach sales with this idea that it's oppositional, right? That this person's coming, one of us is going to win, one of us is going to lose. Either you're going to do what I want, or I'm going to fail to do what you want. But that's not what's happening at all, right? If we're first striving to understand their problem and then honestly and fully committed to helping them solve that problem, then we're side by side, right? Now we're facing the same thing together. And one of the things that is so disconcerting about honesty is we don't live in a world of natural dangers. We're not walking around thinking that a bird is going to stoop and pluck us out of the street, or that a tiger is going to jump out of a building. We live in a world of social dangers. We are social animals, and we are wired to see the world of other people as our field of threats. And what that means is that we're very sensitive and attuned to when something isn't right with the other person. When are they lying? When is just something not right? Like, if you're the least bit inauthentic when you're in a sales conversation, the person you're talking to is going to know. And they won't know exactly what it is or why, but they'll know something's wrong. And then part of their brain the whole time is going to be trying to figure out, all right, what's going on here? But being totally honest completely disarms that. When you're absolutely straightforward and just say, well, this is what I've got, this is what it's going to do for you, this is what it won't do for you. I really don't know. I think it's your call as to whether you think that's worth the worth the spend or not. But that leaves somebody with all of their attention now on the solution and none of it on you. Right? They're not trying to figure out what you're doing or why you're doing it. They're trying to solve their problem, and you're trying to solve their problem. And that creates a great process, right? And that's somebody who's going to really know and appreciate who you are and what you do. And for me, my insurance guy who's on the call here, Peter O'Keefe, is an exemplar of this, right? The way he sells insurance is from this place of total assistance. And, you do what you're going to make the decision to do what you need to do. I'm going to give you everything I can to help you make that decision well. The last part of this, and I talked to Mark about this ahead of the presentation, is to make the recommendation, right? You tell them what you know, and you tell them what you think you should do. And if you honestly think that your solution is the one for them, you tell them that. And when it's coming from a place of your genuine belief and you are clear that you would have told them anything else otherwise, then there's, again, that sense that there's nothing wrong here. This person's just saying, given what you said, you're the person I've designed this thing for. I think you should do it. I think it'll help. It's just going to land without resistance, without suspicion, without disregard. So how do you do that? How do you just be trustable and be yourself in a sales situation? Because for many of us, being in a conversation where someone else is trying to decide whether or not to give us money, it's just weird, right? It's so freighted with personal baggage, with our stories about money, our stories about self-worth, our stories about social acceptance and judgment, right? It's a very strange and distorting conversation to be in until you've been in enough of them that it starts to feel kind of normal. But initially, it can be really weird to be ourselves and be authentic and trust and natural in such a strange conversation. And when we're not, when we're feeling weird, we're not trustable, right? Because there's, again, that sense that something's wrong. And I think I didn't get your name. Nevada Television was saying this earlier, that or no, was it Suzanne? That you get into the conversation and you're just like, oh God, it's about money now. And it's not because there's anything wrong with your product, but it's because you don't like the conversation about money. And so now they're left with something's wrong here, and I don't know what it is. Right? So how do we get into a place where we can be ourselves in this weird situation? And one of the best things to do is to really get connected with what you care about, right? With what your commitment is. How are you going to help this person? What matters to you? And the reason is that if you care about that thing, like what I care about is creating personal freedom in people to be who they want to be. That's what I love. And that's those are the conversations I would have, whether we're paid to have them or not. So when I'm having a consultation conversation, that's the only thing on my mind, is I want this person to feel free to be their best possible selves. How can I do that? And that matters to me more than my own self-consciousness and more than my own questions or concerns about money or any of that stuff. So getting connected to your value, to what you want to be forwarding in the world, that's what makes the biggest difference. And I should say that everything that I'm talking about now, and I should have said this at the very beginning, I meant to say this at the very beginning, all this works if you believe in what you're selling. And if you don't, then you should stop selling. Now, you can get good at it. You can definitely get good at selling things that you don't personally believe in, that you don't see the value in. But by getting good at that, you'll become bitter and cynical, and you will begin to have contempt for people. It's just not a healthy thing, and you need someone else to help you do that. But if you believe in what you're selling, you can get good at sales. The reason or the way to do it is to stay connected to what you believe about it. Why is it that this matters? And that's going to be something that helps you be grounded in that conversation where this other person is trying to decide whether to hand you money or write a check. Something else I wanted to mention too is, in backing up a little bit, when you're making a recommendation about someone, if you're telling somebody that they should take the next step, you want to be mindful and connected to what their next step is. Now, you don't want to be telling someone that they should write you a check when they have to go get board approval to do it, right? So when you're making a recommendation, make sure that you're in their world and you're recommending the thing that's appropriate for them to do next. Okay, enough skipping around. So bottom line, when it comes down to how you're going to do this and how you're going to take care of yourself in this process, you want to get organized. You want to develop yourself. You want to get resourced and get support. To approach sales, to approach getting better at sales, what you want to do is pick one thing to get better at every conversation. Right? Focus on one thing. Maybe it's going to be, I want to establish relatedness and ease early on, or I want to make sure that I get their concerns, or I want to say the price without my voice wavering. But choose one thing that you're going to choose to improve on and focus on that. Have a partner a mentor or accountability partner or someone else that you can decompress your sales conversations with. The energy of a sales conversation is contagious. And when you have a bad experience in one sales conversation, that's going to carry to the next one, unless you have some kind of interrupt that comes in where you can actually process this somewhat and laugh about it a little bit. When I was in business school, I had a drumming partner. We did a lot of African drumming, and we took on this project where we wanted to see, because we fall out. You'd be drumming, it'd be a great time, you'd fall out of the groove, and that was annoying. So we wanted to stay in the groove as long as we could. So we took on this project of trying to see how fast we could get back in the groove. But we knew that if we tried to stay in the groove, you just get tight, and that becomes a problem. You fall out, and you've failed. But getting back into the groove is something like a meditation. And what we found is the fastest way to get back in the groove is to laugh. And the same thing is true of getting out of a bad groove in a sales conversation. Like if you have a bad conversation that goes south, you've really got to laugh it off. And you can't do that alone. It's just not easy. It seems kind of weird to be laughing in the dark alone. I do that a lot, never mind. So get a partner, have someone you can decompress these conversations with. Choose something that you're going to develop yourself in. Get resourced. Buy Never Split the Difference. It's one of the best books on, I call it the best applied emotional intelligence book I've ever read. It's on negotiation, but the techniques are equally applicable to a sales situation. There's also a book called The Perfect Close by a guy named John Muir. That is a really wonderful approach to making sure that the sales pace is determined by the customers. It's flexible, soft, non-pushy way of driving a sale to closure. Great book. If you're interested in studying this with me, I'm creating a course on sales for people who hate sales, and you can join the interest list. And I'll put the URL in the chat here. There's a quick form there. You can put your name on that interest list and you'll get a discount on that course when it comes out. But you want to get resourced and get organized and have people to do this with. Just don't do it alone. We're not wired for that. This is why drinking alone is a bad thing. Right? There are bars because we are built to have our experiences together. And when we are trying to do something like change and where we're trying to get to be familiar and comfortable in a situation that is unfamiliar and uncomfortable, that's hard. And it involves lots and lots of resistance on lots of different levels. And we have it in our minds that it should be a simple thing, and we make ourselves wrong for it being difficult, or for ourselves, for our waywardness and for our stubbornness and our difficulties. But the fact is that change is really hard. And if you're not supported, if it's not a social experience, it's very difficult to be as kind to yourself as you need to be, because we default to being pretty rough on ourselves in those kinds of situations. So don't go it alone. You're just not wired for it. All right. So that's pretty much what I've got. I would love to throw it open to questions and comments. And
before we do, Scott, since the chat does not translate into the video, I just want to let everybody know on the video that to get a hold of Scott, you go to www.thesoulsadventure.com. And if you have /good sales, that will connect you to Scott's promotion. I'll spell it out because I'm dyslexic, but it's you spell it the way you read it. It's www.thesoulsadventure.com/GOODSALES. Did I get it right, Scott?
You did. Thanks, Bob. And I'm glad I didn't name it YouCanBeGoodAtSales.com.
He actually missed the final E in adventure.
Oh,
don't do it again.
Don't do it again. All right. You'll have to, like, if you're watching on video, just rewind and add the Z, add the E. All right. Well, that concludes our video portion of it. I'm going to stop the recording and we'll begin the question and answer portion.